I feel that I needed to sort of set it up in a way where we are not attempting yet another translation or yet another interpretation of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, but we can identify assumptions and prejudices that we hold, and we could identify some very likely assumptions that Patanjali himself would hold. Now,
yes, thank you, Babaji. I don't want to go too far ahead, but as you were discussing breaking down the padas,
yes.
The in this samadhi pada, when in the second sutra, I was just thinking of, in terms of sacred speech, that this yogas chitta vritti nirodha, this nirodha of not compounding. I'm not going to go into more details, but just I had a big aha moment in terms of how the Yoga Sutras, then the asana, stiram sukham asanam, could also be describing the way that speech is moving, like the asana, that your tongue is actually moving, making these asana in your mouth, and that it's all kind of coming. I'm having just this big aha moment about how you're describing the Yoga Sutras in terms of sacred speech. Thank you very much. It's
yes,
very powerful.
you're absolutely moving in the right direction with that. There's some more distance, obviously, to cover, because we have to remember that that whereas Patanjali is being informed by speech and by grammar, and where he is making an assumption that anybody that would be hearing Yoga Sutra would also be informed by speech and grammar, still this Yoga Sutras is not specifically a text on speech and grammar, but as we can take from its title, this is a text on connection, yoga, connecting something, and connecting something in such a way where speech is going to play a very major role. And you, of course, pointed out one of the sutras that we do have to spend some time discussing. In fact, I'll point out that there, off the top of my mind, there would be three that we really should be speaking about. One is this chitta vritti nirodha, and the other is, as I mentioned, this sukham stiram asanam. And the third one, of course, is this yam niyam asana pranayam pratyahar dharan jhan samadhi, because this is extremely significant to all of this. What you will find in many of the translations and the interpretations, that chitti is thought of as mind, and I will argue against this. That chitti, as far as I have always understood, we're referring to consciousness. But in this sutra, what is it? It's a yogas chitta vritti nirodha. So if you would break this down in terms of Sanskrit grammar, you get yogaha chitta vritti nirodha. Okay. So, in other words, there are not four words there. This is not yoga plus chitti plus vritti plus nirodha. that according to Sanskrit grammar, this is two words. You have yoga, and you have a compound, a samasa, of three words consisting of chittavritti and nirodha. Chittavritti, together, when you combine chitta and vritti, and have one expression, chittavritti, then I believe that could be possibly used as mind. Because that we could see as the movements of consciousness. And we can interpret the movements of consciousness to be the mind. But we cannot interpret chittavritti to be the movements or the changes of the mind, as many of the modern neo-spiritual and yoga movements would want us to believe. There's these expressions of the monkey mind and stop the mind and so forth. This is not the intention. I don't believe this is the intention at all of Patanjali in these discussions of vritti and especially chittavritti. Now, for one, I'll just point this out briefly because we don't have too much time left, that I notice in many of the modern translations, especially translations and interpretations that are less academic and more sort of yoga organization, yoga school oriented, that vritti almost has a negative connotation, that it's something that you want to do something about because it's the vritti that is the klesha, that is the obstruction. Vritti is not negative, and it's not an obstruction. And in fact, what you will find is you will find that the commentaries on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are called vrittis. Vrittis and vartikas. Vartika is the word vritti, but pumped up by techniques of guru and vritti in Sanskrit to lengthen the vowels. But the vrittis, these are commentaries, these are compounding of things. These are explaining of things, and this is how the world is created, is through these vrittis. What Patanjali is telling us is he is not making moral statements. He's not saying vrittis are bad, get rid of them. He's saying, in fact, these vrittis are the keys to reversing the flow of awareness into a mistaken connection with the world. He's talking about reversing this flow of vrittis and taking this flow back to its source. This is what makes Yoga Sutras separate from Mahabhashya, his commentary on grammar. That in his commentary on grammar, he is making a description of speech. With his Yoga Sutras, he is making an application of the knowledge of speech so that we may have knowledge of ourselves. Yes?
Why is it the knowledge of speech rather than the knowledge of whatever sort of techniques he used in order to achieve his state of consciousness?
Okay. First of all, the techniques involved are the techniques of speech itself. The recognizing the resemblances and correspondences that we discussed 3 or 4 classes ago, understanding how syllables, words, and sentences connect in terms of these resemblances and correspondences, these are the techniques of Patanjali. However, there's two very important things that, as I mentioned in the first Samadhi Pada, he brings to the forefront. The first one is abhyasa, right? Abhyas is practice and steady practice. And we have to understand what this means in terms of speech itself. And the other one is vairagya, which is actually the most important thing. And in fact, if you asked any of my gurus, what is the actual practice of yoga, what is the actual sadhana of yoga, they would most likely say it's vairagya, it's tapasya. This is the actual practice, the physical practice, the physical culture of yoga is vairagya. Hari?
It's so the physical practice of yoga is one of the two. It's the vairagya.
Is the vairagya, yeah. I mean, this traditionally speaking, I'm speaking from the point of view of an oral tradition, that is described as an oral tradition of yogis, whatever that means these days. But in terms of tradition, what is called or are considered yogis.